Hello, ladies and gentlemen of Dialectic. This is our last video of the year for writing. And today what we have is what I like to call story time with Mrs. McDonald. And what I did was I chose some of my favorite papers that have been written over the course of the year. And they've all been written by you. So this little segment stars each of you. I picked one paper from each of your portfolios. And I picked them so that they go chronologically over the course of the year. I didn't do a paper for every lesson, but just picked out what I thought were some of the best representations of the class from each week. So without further ado, we will begin. Our first featured author is Liam Stevens, and he is sharing with us some interesting theories. Welcome to Italy. It is the early 1500s. You can just smell the excitement in the air. Explorers are telling tantalizing tales of new lands. Architects are erecting astounding structures. Artists are painting magnificent masterpieces, and scientists are making stupefying discoveries, which has been extremely interesting. Hey, look, it's Galileo. Just the other day we all gathered curiously at the bottom of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. What a sight awaited us, for there was Galileo himself on the top of the tower with two weights. I was informed that one of the weights was only 1 pound, while the other was 10 pounds. What I was told next was truly astounding. He was attempting to prove Aristotle wrong. Galileo was claiming that the two balls would fall at the same time, unlike Aristotle's theory, which claimed that the heavier something is, the faster it falls. I personally am for Aristotle's theory, but wait, could it be? No, it couldn't, but is it? Oh my good glory, they hit the ground at the same time. Yes, that was quite a day, and boy did those professors look mad. They even rejected the fact that the event happened. But have you heard? A couple days ago, Galileo was put under house arrest. Apparently he badmouthed the Pope. Can you believe it? He had just become a professor at Padua. He had been making some astounding discoveries. Seems odd, doesn't it? He had an interesting theory. He said that the sun is the center of the universe. Very intriguing, no? Oh my, look at the time. Well, I best be off or I'll be late for my chores. Bueno Dio ti benedica, which means goodbye and God bless. Thank you, Liam Stevens. Next up, we have Jacob McDonald, and he is going to share with us about modern flight. It was a cold November night in the Montgolfier home. Joseph Montgolfier was sitting by the fire, fascinated with the rising smoke. Joseph called to his brother Jacques, who was on the other side of the room. Hey, bro, come look at the smoke. Because Jacques didn't want to move, he complained. So what? Joseph patiently explained. Don't you see the smoke rises? We could make a flying machine with the gases, from the smoke. They wondered how to make the machine fly. For their first experiment, they took a small pouch, put it over the fire, and it flew because of the smoke's gases. Eventually, they manufactured a balloon which measured 33 feet in diameter. This balloon rose 6,000 feet up and hovered there for 10 minutes. Soon, spectators gathered, amazed at this marvelous invention. Word soon reached the king. The king and queen invited the Montgolfier brothers to their palace, which was located in Versailles, for a test to see if the balloon was sufficient for carrying live animals. The test was to take place on September 19, 1783. They carefully placed a duck, a sheep, and a rooster in the balloon's basket. 130,000 spectators had gathered to watch in excitement. The balloon rose for 8 minutes and traveled 2 miles before safely landing once more. The modern era of flight had begun. Thank you, Jacob McDonald. Our next paper comes to us from Eden Davis, and she is going to be sharing with us the devastating French Revolution. Not long after the American Revolution, France had its own revolution from 1789 to 1799. However, this revolution was very different from America's. It began when King Louis XVI increased the taxes on working people, and this made them very angry, for they were already in debt. The Queen, Marie Antoinette, wasted much of their money on fancy clothes, diamonds, and extravagant wigs. The nobility, who paid almost no taxes, lived wonderful lives, while the poor working people lived horrendous lives. Food was scarce, and many of them could not even afford a loaf of bread. Furious riots broke out, and on June 14, 1789, they stormed Bastille, a prison, stole the weapons stored there, and took control of the country. Soon, with the help of Thomas Jefferson, they wrote their own declarations of the rights of man and of the citizen. In it, they said, men are born and remain free and equal in rights. However, their rule was fueled by hatred towards the upper class, and they enacted their revenge during the Reign of Terror, when bloodthirsty radicals in the government beheaded more than 16,000 nobility, including the king and queen. Ironically, the revolution ended when Napoleon, a military leader, declared himself the Emperor of France 10 years later. The people of France executed one ruler only to make way for another. Thank you, Eden Davis. Moving along in history, we now come to the revolution in Latin America. And this paper on the Liberator is by Bridget Hine. The Latin American war hero, Simon Bolivar, has a fascinating history on how he led a revolution against Spain, which was ruling Latin America at the time. In Venezuela, South America, he lived until he moved to Europe to study the writings of the Enlightenment. While in Europe, he solemnly promised himself that he would free his home from Spain. When he returned, he was very solicitous for his country and made famous speeches encouraging the people to fight for their freedom. He was appointed a military leader and played a huge part in the decade-long war, his first victory being in 1813. The Latin Americans eventually claimed their freedom over Britain. The war hero was named El Libertador, the Liberator, for his services to Latin America. Thank you, Bridget Hine. Our next story is based on these 3 pictures. If you guys remember, you had to write at least a 3-paragraph paper based on the pictures, and this was on Robert Fulton's Steamboat. Okay, and so we have Robert Hine up with his interpretation of those 3 pictures. It's called Arrived in a Steamboat. From a chapter of R. Fulton's diary, The Maiden Voyage of the Clermont. I, Robert Fulton, feel that it will be a pleasant day to test my newly built steamboat, for the weather is clear as can be and the waters are at their calmest. And on this special occasion I've brought with me my family and a few other choice passengers brave enough to face the greatest turn of events for commercial sea trade in the last century, the steamboat. The Clermont sailed smoothly, But most of my passengers seem at unease and even slightly scared at this new form of transportation, which, with its miniature smokestacks and the rather frightening fire in the boiler room, is rather intimidating. Although their quiet and sometimes not so quiet fear, I am unperturbed and even excited with my revolutionary ship. Half an hour into the voyage, though, my passengers' protests about the Clermont and me, the captain, are becoming louder and more frequent. During the voyage, engine problem and violent jostling serves only to intensify their constant worry. When I depart to the boiler to see what was wrong, I was met by sparks flying in every direction, which prevented me from seeing what had happened. I put on my leather apron and gloves, which protected me from a flurry of smoke and sparks. Then I saw the damage to my ship. There was a huge, gaping hole in the floor, and by the looks of it, the hull breach had transpired moments before. Then I saw an unconscious coal scooper. Moving to save him probably kept me from expiring right then and there, because seconds after I ran to rescue him, a giant tentacle pushed through the place where I had been. With seconds to lose, I hoisted the man up and ran to the exit. Luckily, the tentacle temporarily receded, giving us time to escape. While running, I noticed a metal harpoon. I grabbed it. Once we made it to the upper decks, I saw complete chaos. Everyone was screaming, running, and often tripping over one another, desperately trying to dodge the tentacles of what seemed to be a giant kraken. There was something unusual about it, besides from being huge. When it even lightly touched someone, they froze as if they were paralyzed. Then someone called out, "It's the Electro-Kraken." "What?" I yelled amid the confusion. But a thought formed inside my mind. Electro, as in electricity? What if we could channel the electricity back at the monster? But how? I then looked at the harpoon I was holding. It was metal. Everything clicked in my mind. I dropped the coal scooper and tried to take aim. It wasn't easy. More than once, it nearly misfired. But I was finally able to shoot the creature, and when it tried to pull out the harpoon, well, let's just say that the air smelled of a certain Japanese delicacy. Though that was before almost everyone puked. That certainly changed the general scent. Thank goodness I was able to stop the flooding and fix the engine problem, then get us to the nearest dock before I also barfed. About a week after the incident with the Kraken, we were able to get to the Clermont seaworthy. Although because of the Kraken I had a lot fewer passengers, there was nearly a crowd gathered to wish us farewell. As for the voyage, it was everything but eventful. When the Clermont arrived safely at our destination, it successfully proved that steamboats were the future of sea commerce, which meant that not only am I going to need a new diary for all of these voyages, but I may go down in history as its inventor. Thank you, Robbie. All right, our next story is based on the 3 pictures that went with the Eiffel Tower, the World's Fair, if you remember those. And Elijah Guevara is the author. The Paris World's Fair of 1889. In the year 1889, Paris hosted the World's Fair to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution. The Eiffel Tower was built as the entryway to the magnificent event, and at that time it was the tallest man-made structure in the world. The World's Fair presented many exotic exhibits and shows which had come from all over the world, as well as a very suspicious magician who performed illusions and many other strange tricks. French citizens came and happily enjoyed the festivities and the performances at the World's Fair. Thomas Edison, who installed the luminous lights on the Eiffel Tower, presented a phonograph and his first motion picture. As he presented his motion picture to a family, one of their children, a boy named Johnny, slipped away and wandered around the fair. Johnny seemed curious in many shows and exhibits at the fair, but he soon accidentally stumbled into a tent which he wasn't permitted to enter. There, he found a magician and a mysterious jar of pills on his desk. The magician was distracted by something and didn't notice Johnny there, but he soon turned his head and gasped as he caught sight of the boy stuffing the pills from the jar into his mouth. "Stop!" the magician yelled, but it was already too late. Johnny looked back at him as a dog, walking in on two hind legs, came to the tent. "Hey, master!" the dog waved at the magician. "The rabbit trick was successful. The smoke machine worked perfectly. The dove machines functioned flawlessly, and whoa, master!" The pills had caused him to grow rapidly so that Johnny's head expanded and his legs grew longer, and the magician worried about what would happen to the World's Fair if this giant was set loose. The magician attempted to stop him, but Johnny soon burst out of the tent. Now he was well over 20 feet high, and he slowly trudged through the festival. The frightened citizens ran away and screamed as they saw him coming towards them. As the magician tried to calm him down, Johnny, who was now around 40 feet high, saw the Eiffel Tower in the distance, illuminated by all of Thomas Edison's lights. Mesmerized by the brilliant lights, he approached the tower and started climbing it. Johnny's family saw him and called for him to come down, which he didn't listen to. He hung on to the Eiffel Tower and pounded his chest like King Kong would on the Empire State Building 40 years later. Suddenly, before he could reach the top of the Eiffel Tower, the dog flew by on a gigantic vulture and kicked Johnny out of the sky. The magician injected the antidote into him. The effect was reversed. Johnny was returned to his normal size, and the city was saved. The antidote also caused Johnny to be diseased with pneumonia, microscopic viliocovolcaniciosis, and one day Johnny would return to France as a walking volcano to exact his revenge on the Parisian magician. The sun soon began its descent into the horizon, thus ending the very interesting event of the Paris World's Fair of 1889. Thank you, Elijah. And last but not least, we have a story written by Jimmy Kanzenbach based on these three pictures. He had assistance from Liam Stevens, Jacob McDonald, and Mrs. McDonald. All right. Relieved but dead. In the deep, distant, and weirdly named land of Panama, there existed 3 men named Jed, Tim, and Bob. They were digging the Panama Canal, joining one ocean to the other. It was demanding work, but the pay was good. They also wanted to be able to sail their boat, made entirely of bacon, through the canal when it was done. Now Jed, who was the only one who hadn't broken the law, was a hard worker. The other 2 were planning to steal Jed's money, although it was an insignificant amount. Their plan involved a 40-foot snake named Garfield, who never hissed, but instead would move. Their plan also had jet-propelled mosquitoes, who would distract Jed, allowing Garfield to coil around his legs. With his legs entangled, Bob and Tim would use their shovels and murder poor Jed, but use the snake as their alibi. Unbeknownst to them was the fact that Garfield had been eaten by a mysterious unnamed snake who had his own devious plans for all 3 of the men and had converted the jet-propelled mosquitoes into his own personal army. One day later, while the 3 men were shoveling, Jed felt something slimy slither up his leg. He squealed as it was tightening around his leg. Bob and Tim grinned, expecting to see Garfield. However, when they saw that it was a mysterious, unnamed snake, they were frightened. Jed was trying to kill the snake on his leg, but every time he hit it, it squeezed a little harder, which hurt very bad. Jed began rolling on the rocky ground, screaming like a little girl. In seconds, the snake was moving up to his waist. The other two men decided instantly it would be better to help Jed than murder him. Thinking that Jed would be so relieved to be alive, he would share his money with them. The men were thwarted from their duty, however, by the jet-propelled mosquitoes. They became too weak from the pests sucking their blood. Finally, and unexpectedly, the slimy thing slithered away and the mosquitoes followed it, flying in formation over the snake's head. Jed, Tim, and Bob were tired but relieved after the incident. Somehow they had successfully warded off an attack from this hissing, slithering snake and band of mosquitoes. Jed pointed his finger angrily after them and exclaimed, "Don't try that again, mates." Realizing they were dehydrated, they soon returned to camp. Little did they know that the snake had planted a bomb in Jed's pant leg pocket, which would detonate shortly. In a few hours, Jed, Tim, and Bob were relieved from their work duties because they were dead. Epilogue. The commander of the camp tiptoed out into the jungle later that night and met up with the mysterious snake. Smiling hideously, the commander set down a box of fresh delicacies for his partner in crime. "Excellent work, Snidely. 3 more salaries in my pocket and a boatload of bacon for you to eat. Tomorrow let's get Fred, Jim, and Rob." The end. Or is it? Thank you, Jimmy Kanzenbach, Liam, and Jacob for that story. So, I hope you enjoyed those stories as much as I did. You guys did a fantastic job this year. I enjoyed working with you so much, and I pray that you all have wonderful summers, and we will see each other again soon. God bless you.